Welcome back to WION. Some breaking news coming in right this hour. Former fired FBI Chief James Comey is now testifying at Capitol Hill in front of the Senate Intelligence Committee, talking about his role in conversations and interactions with Donald Trump. Let's listen in.
The testimony that Mr. Comey has submitted for today's hearing is very disturbing. For example, on January 27th, after summoning Director Comey to dinner, the president appears to have threatened the director's job while telling him, quote, "I need loyalty. I expect loyalty." At a later meeting on February 14th, the president asked the Attorney General to leave the Oval Office so that he could privately ask Director Comey, again, quote, to see way clear to letting Flynn go. That is a statement that Director Comey interpreted as a request that he drop the investigation connected to General Flynn's false statements. Think about it. The President of the United States asking the FBI director to drop an ongoing investigation. And after that, the President called the FBI director on 2 additional occasions, March 30th and April 11th, and asked him again, quote, to lift the cloud on the Russia investigation. Now, Director Comey denied each of these improper requests. The loyalty pledge, the admonition to drop the Flynn investigation, the request to lift the cloud on the Russia investigation. Of course, after his refusals, Director Comey was fired. The initial explanation for the firing didn't pass any smell test. Somehow Director Comey was fired because he didn't treat Hillary Clinton appropriately. Of course, that explanation lasted about a day because the president himself then made very clear that he was thinking about Russia when he decided to fire Director Comey. Shockingly, reports suggest that the president admitted as much in an Oval Office meeting with the Russians the day after Director Comey was fired. Disparaging our country's top law enforcement official as a quote-unquote nut job, the president allegedly suggested that his firing relieved great pressure on his feelings about Russia. This is not happening in isolation. At the same time the president was engaged in these efforts with Director Comey, he was also, at least allegedly, asking senior leaders of the intelligence community to downplay the Russian investigation or to intervene with the director. Yesterday, we had DNI Director Coates and NSA Director Admiral Rogers, who were offered a number of opportunities to flatly deny those press reports. They expressed their opinions, but they did not take that opportunity to deny those reports. They did not take advantage of that opportunity. In my belief, that's not how the President of the United States should behave. Regardless of the outcome of our investigation into the Russia links, Director Comey's firing and his testimony raise separate and troubling questions that we must get to the bottom of. Again, as I said at the outset, I've seen firsthand how seriously every member of this committee is taking his work. I'm proud of the committee's efforts so far. Let me be clear. This is not a witch hunt. This is not fake news. It is an effort to protect our country from a new threat that, quite honestly, will not go away anytime soon. So, Mr. Comey, your testimony here today will help us move towards that goal. I look forward to that testimony. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Vice Chairman. Director, as discussed when you agreed to appear before the committee, it would be under oath. I'd ask you to please stand, raise your right hand. Do you solemnly swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God? Please be seated. Director Comey, you're now under oath. And I would just note to members, you will be recognized by seniority for a period up to 7 minutes. And again, it is the intent to move to a closed session no later than 1 p.m. With that, Director Comey, you are recognized. You have the floor for as long as you might need.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ranking Member Warner, members of the committee, thank you for inviting me here to testify today. I've submitted my statement for the record, and I'm not going to repeat it here this morning. I thought I would just offer some very brief introductory remarks, and then I would welcome your questions. When I was appointed FBI Director in 2013, I understood that I served at the pleasure of the President. Even though I was appointed to a 10-year term, which Congress created in order to underscore the importance of the FBI being outside of politics and independent, I understood that I could be fired by a president for any reason or for no reason at all. And on May the 9th, when I learned that I had been fired, for that reason, I immediately came home as a private citizen. But then the explanations, the shifting explanations, confused me and increasingly concerned me. They confused me because the President and I had had multiple conversations about my job, both before and after he took office. And he had repeatedly told me I was doing a great job and he hoped I would stay. And I had repeatedly assured him that I did intend to stay and serve out the remaining 6 years of my term. He told me repeatedly that he had talked to lots of people about me, including our current Attorney General, and had learned that I was doing a great job and that I was extremely well liked by the FBI workforce. So it confused me when I saw on television the President saying that he actually fired me because of the Russia investigation, and learned again from the media that he was telling privately other parties that my firing had relieved great pressure on the Russia investigation. I was also confused by the initial explanation that was offered publicly that I was fired because of the decisions I had made during the election year. That didn't make sense to me for a whole bunch of reasons, including the time and all the water that had gone under the bridge since those hard decisions had had to be made. That didn't make any sense to me. And although the law required no reason at all to fire an FBI director, the administration then chose to defame me, and more importantly the FBI, by saying that the organization was in disarray, that it was poorly led, that the workforce had lost confidence in its leader. Those were lies, plain and simple. And I am so sorry that the FBI workforce had to hear them, and I'm so sorry that the American people were told them. I worked every day at the FBI to help make that great organization better. And I say help because I did nothing alone at the FBI. There are no indispensable people at the FBI. The organization's great strength is that its values and abilities run deep and wide. The FBI will be fine without me. The FBI's mission will be relentlessly pursued by its people, and that mission is to protect the American people and uphold the Constitution of the United States. I will deeply miss being part of that mission, but this organization and its mission will go on long beyond me and long beyond any particular administration. I have a message before I close for my former colleagues of the FBI, but at first I want the American people to know this truth. The FBI is honest, the FBI is strong, and the FBI is and always will be independent. And now to my former colleagues, if I may. I am so sorry that I didn't get the chance to say goodbye to you properly. It was the honor of my life to serve beside you, to be part of the FBI family, and I will miss it for the rest of my life. Thank you for standing watch. Thank you for doing so much good for this country. Do that good as long as ever you can. And Senators, I look forward to your questions.
Director, thank you for that testimony, both oral and the written testimony that you provided to the committee yesterday and made public to the American people. Chair would recognize himself first for 12 minutes, Vice Chair for 12 minutes, based upon the agreement we have. Director, did the Special Counsel's Office review and/or edit your written testimony?
No.
Do you have any doubt that Russia attempted to interfere in the 2016 elections?
None.
Do you have any doubt that the Russian government was behind the intrusions in the DNC and the DCCC systems and the subsequent leaks of that information?
No, no doubt.
Do you have any doubt that the Russian government was behind the cyber intrusion into state voter files?
No.
Do you have any doubt that officials of the Russian government were fully aware of these activities?
No doubt.
Are you confident that no votes cast in the 2016 presidential election were altered?
I'm confident. By the time when I left as director, I'd seen no indication of that whatsoever.
Director Comey, did the president at any time ask you to stop the FBI investigation into Russian involvement in the 2016 U.S. elections?
Not to my understanding, no.
Did any individual working for this administration, including the Justice Department, ask you to stop the Russian investigation?
No.
Director, when the president requested that you, and I quote, let Flynn go, General Flynn had an unreported contact with the Russians, which is an offense. And if press accounts are right, there might have been discrepancies between facts and his FBI testimony. In your estimation, was General Flynn at that time in serious legal jeopardy? And in addition to that, do you sense that the president was trying to obstruct justice or just seek for a way for Mike Flynn to save face, given he had already been fired?
Well, General Flynn at that point in time was in legal jeopardy. There was an open FBI criminal investigation of his statements in connection with the Russian contacts and the contacts themselves. And so that was my assessment at the time. I don't think it's for me to say whether the conversation I had with the president was an effort to obstruct. I took it as a very disturbing thing, very concerning, but that's a conclusion I'm sure the special counsel will work towards to try and understand what the intention was there and whether that's an offense.
Director, is it possible that as part of this FBI investigation, the FBI could find evidence of criminality that is not tied to the 2016 elections, possible collusion, or coordination with Russians?
Sure.
So there could be something that just fits a criminal aspect to this that doesn't have anything to do with the 2016 elections.
Correct. In any complex investigation, when you start turning over rocks, sometimes you find things that are unrelated to the primary investigation that are criminal in nature.
Director Comey, you have been criticized publicly for the decision to present your findings on the email investigation directly to the American people. Have you learned anything since that time that would have changed what you said or how you chose to inform the American people?
Honestly, no. I mean, it caused a whole lot of personal pain for me, but as I look back, given what I knew at the time and even what I've learned since, I think it was the best way to try and protect the justice institution, including the FBI.
In the public domain is this question of the Steele dossier, a document that has been around now for over a year. I'm not sure when the FBI first took possession of it, but the media had it before you had it and we had it. At the time of your departure from the FBI, was the FBI able to confirm any criminal allegations contained in the Steele document?
Mr. Chairman, I don't think that's a question I can answer in an open setting because it goes into the details of the investigation.
Director, the term we hear most often is collusion. When people are describing possible links between Americans and Russian government entities related to the interference in our election, would you say that it's normal for foreign governments to reach out to members of an incoming administration?
Yes.
At what point does the normal contact cross the line into an attempt to recruit agents or influence or spies?
Difficult to say in the abstract. It depends upon the context, whether there's an effort to keep it covert, or what the nature of the requests made of the American by the foreign government are. It's a judgment call based on a whole lot of facts.
At what point would that recruitment become a counterintelligence threat to our country?
Again, difficult to answer in the abstract, but when a foreign power is using especially coercion or some sort of pressure to try and co-opt an American, especially a government official, to act on its behalf, that's a serious concern to the FBI and at the heart of the FBI's counterintelligence mission.
So if you've got a 36-page document of specific claims that are out there, the FBI would have to, for counterintelligence reasons, try to verify anything that might be claimed in there. One, and probably first and foremost, is the counterintelligence concerns that we have about blackmail. Would that be an accurate statement?
Yes. If the FBI receives a credible allegation that there is some effort to co-opt, coerce, direct, employ covertly an American on behalf of the foreign power, that's the basis on which a counterintelligence investigation is opened.
And when you read the dossier, what was your reaction, given that it was 100% directed at the president-elect?
Not a question I can answer in an open setting, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. When did you become aware of the cyber intrusion?
The first there's all kinds of cyber intrusions going on all the time. The first Russia-connected cyber intrusion I became aware of in the late summer of 2015.
And in that time frame, there were more than the DNC and the DCCC that were targets.
Correct. There was a massive effort to target government and non-governmental, near-governmental agencies like nonprofits.
What would be the estimate of how many entities out there the Russians specifically targeted in that time frame?
It's hundreds. I suppose it could be more than 1,000, but it's at least hundreds.
When did you become aware that data had been exfiltrated?
I'm not sure exactly. I think either late 15 or early 16.
And did you, the director of the FBI, have conversations with the last administration about the risk that this posed?
Yes.
And share with us, if you will, what actions they took.
Well, the FBI had already undertaken an effort to notify all the victims, and that's what we consider the entities that were attacked as part of this massive spear phishing campaign. And so we notified them in an effort to disrupt what might be ongoing. And then there was a series of continuing interactions with entities through the rest of 15 into 16. And then throughout 16, the administration was trying to decide how to respond to the intrusion activity that it saw.
And the FBI in this case, unlike other cases that you might investigate, did you ever have access to the actual hardware that was hacked, or did you have to rely on a third party to provide you the data that they had collected?
In the case of the DNC, and I believe the DCCC, but I'm sure the DNC, we did not have access to the devices themselves. We got relevant forensic information from a private party, a high-class entity that had done the work, but we didn't get direct access.
But no content?
Correct.
Isn't content an important part of the forensics from a counterintelligence standpoint?
It is, although what was briefed to me by my folks, the people who were my folks at the time, is that they had gotten the information from the private party that they needed to understand the intrusion by the spring of 2016.
Let me go back, if I can, very briefly, to the decision to publicly go out with your results on the email. Was your decision influenced by the Attorney General's tarmac meeting with the former President Bill Clinton?
Yes, in a ultimately conclusive way. That was the thing that capped it for me, that I had to do something separately to protect the credibility of the investigation, which meant both the FBI and the Justice Department.
Were there other things that contributed to that that you can describe in an open session?
There were other things that contributed to that. One significant item I can't. I know the committee's been briefed on. There's been some public accounts of it which are nonsense, but I understand the committee's been briefed on the classified facts. Probably the only other consideration that I guess I can talk about in an open setting is that at one point the Attorney General had directed me not to call it an investigation, but instead to call it a matter, which confused me and concerned me. But that was one of the bricks in the load that led me to conclude I have to step away from the department if we're to close this case credibly.
Director, my last question. You're not only a seasoned prosecutor, you've led the FBI for years. You understand the investigative process. You've worked with this committee closely and we're grateful to you because I think we've mutually built trust in what your organization does and what we do. Is there any doubt in your mind that this committee can carry out its oversight role in the 2016 Russian involvement in the elections in parallel with the now special counsel that's been set up?
No, no doubt. It can be done. It requires lots of conversations. But Bob Mueller is one of this country's great pros, and I'm sure you all will be able to work it out with him to run it in parallel. I
want to thank you once again. I want to turn to the Vice Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And again, Director Comey, thank you for your service. And your comments to your FBI family, I know were heartfelt. Know that even though there are some in the administration who've tried to smear your reputation, you had Acting Director McCabe in public testimony a few weeks back and in public testimony yesterday reaffirm that the vast majority of the FBI community had great trust in your leadership and obviously trust in your integrity. I want to go through a number of the meetings that you referenced in your testimony. And let's start with the January 6th meeting in Trump Tower, where you went up with a series of officials to brief the President-elect on the Russia investigation. My understanding is you remained afterwards to brief him on, again, quote, some personally sensitive aspects of the information you relayed. Now, you said after that briefing, you felt compelled to document that conversation, that you actually started documenting it as soon as you got into the car. Now, you've had extensive experience at the Department of Justice and at the FBI. You've worked under presidents of both parties. What was it about that meeting that led you to determine that you needed to start putting down a written record?
A combination of things. I think the circumstances, the subject matter, and the person I was interacting with. Circumstances first, I was alone with the President of the United States, or the President-elect, soon to be President. The subject matter, I was talking about matters that touch on the FBI's core responsibility and that relate to the President-elect personally. And then the nature of the person. I was honestly concerned that he might lie about the nature of our meeting, and so I thought it really important to document. That combination of things I'd never experienced before, but it led me to believe I got to write it down, and I got to write it down in a very detailed way.
I think that's a very important statement you just made. And my understanding is that then, again, unlike your dealings with presidents of either parties in your past experience, in every subsequent meeting or conversation with this president, you created a written record. Did you feel that you needed to create this written record of these memos because they might need to be relied on at some future date?
Sure. I created records after conversations, and I think I did it after each of our 9 conversations. If I didn't, I did it for nearly all of them, especially the ones that were substantive. I knew that there might come a day when I would need a record of what had happened, not just to defend myself, but to defend the FBI and our integrity as an institution and the independence of our investigative function. That's what made this so difficult, is it was a combination of circumstances, subject matter, and the particular person.
And so in all your experience, this was the only president that you felt like in every meeting you needed to document, because at some point, using your words, he might put out a non-truthful representation of that meeting. Now,
that's right, Senator. And I, as I said in my written testimony, as FBI director, I interacted with President Obama, and I spoke only twice in 3 years and didn't document it. When I was Deputy Attorney General, I had one-on-one meeting with President Bush about a very important and difficult national security matter. I didn't write a memo documenting that conversation either. Sent a quick email to my staff to let them know there was something going on. But I didn't feel with President Bush the need to document it in that way. Again, because the combination of those factors just wasn't present with either President Bush or President Obama.
I think that is very significant. I think others will probably question that. Now, the chairman and I have requested those memos. It is our hope that the FBI will get this committee access to those memos so that, again, we can read that contemporaneous rendition so that we've got your side of the story. Now, I know members have said and press have said that if you were a great deal has been made of whether the president, you are asked to, in effect, indicate whether the president was the subject of any investigation. And my understanding is prior to your meeting on January 6th, you discussed with your leadership team whether or not you should be prepared to assure then President-elect Trump that the FBI was not investigating him personally. Now, my understanding is your leadership team agreed with that, but was that a unanimous decision? Was there any debate about that?
It wasn't unanimous. One of the members of the leadership team had a view that although it was technically true, we did not have a counterintelligence file case open on then President-elect Trump. His concern was because we're looking at the potential, again, that's the subject of the investigation, coordination between the campaign and Russia, because it was President Trump, President-elect Trump's campaign, this person's view was inevitably his behavior, his conduct will fall within the scope of that work, and so he was reluctant to make the statement that I made. I disagreed. I thought it was fair to say what was literally true. There is not a counterintelligence investigation of Mr. Trump, and I decided in the moment to say it, given the nature of our conversation.
At that moment in time, did you ever revisit that as in these subsequent sessions?
With the FBI leadership team? Sure. And the leader had that view. It didn't change. His view was still that it was probably, although literally true, his concern was it could be misleading because the nature of the investigation was such that it might well touch, obviously it would touch the campaign, and the person at the head of the campaign would be the candidate. And so that was his view throughout.
Let me move to the January 27th dinner, where you said, quote, the president began by asking me whether I wanted to stay on as FBI director. He also indicated that lots of people, again your words, wanted the job. You go on to say that the dinner itself was seemingly an effort to, quote, have you ask him for your job and create some sort of, quote unquote, patronage relationship. The president seems, from my reading of your memo, to be holding your job or your possibility of continuing in your job over your head in a fairly direct way. What was your impression, and what did you mean by this notion of a patronage relationship?
Well, my impression, and again, it's my impression, I could always be wrong, but my common sense told me that what was going on is either he had concluded or someone had told him that you've already asked Comey to stay and you didn't get anything for it, and that the dinner was an effort to build a relationship, in fact, he asked specifically, of loyalty in the context of asking me to stay. And as I said, what was odd about that is we'd already talked twice about it by that point, and he'd said, I very much hope you'll stay. I hope you'll stay. In fact, I just remembered sitting here, a third one, when you've seen the picture of me walking across the blue room, and what the president whispered in my ear was, I really look forward to working with you. So after those encounters...
And that was just a few days before you were fired.
Yeah, that was on the Sunday after the inauguration. The next Friday, I have dinner, and the president begins by wanting to talk about my job. And so I'm sitting there thinking, wait a minute, 3 times you've already asked me to stay or talked about me staying. My common sense, again, I could be wrong, but my common sense told me what's going on here is that he's looking to get something in exchange for granting my request to stay in the job.
Again, we all understand, I was a governor, I had people work for me, but this constant request, and again, quoting you, him saying that he, despite you explaining your independence, he kept coming back to, I need loyalty, I expect loyalty. Had you ever had any of those kind of requests before from anyone else you'd worked for in the government?
No. And what made me uneasy was, I'm, at that point, the director of the FBI. The reason that Congress created a 10-year term is so that the director is not feeling as if they're serving with political loyalty owed to any particular person. The statue of justice has a blindfold on because you're not supposed to be peeking out to see whether your patron is pleased or not with what you're doing. It should be about the facts and the law. That's why I became FBI director, to be in that kind of position. So that's why I was so uneasy.
Well, let me move on. My time's running out. February 14th, again, it seems a bit strange. You were in a meeting, and your direct superior, the Attorney General, was in that meeting as well. Yet the President asked everyone to leave, including the Attorney General to leave, before he brought up the matter of General Flynn. What was your impression of that type of action? And have you ever seen anything like that before?
No. My impression was something big is about to happen. I need to remember every single word that is spoken. And again, I could be wrong. I'm 56 years old. I've been seen a few things. My sense was the Attorney General knew he shouldn't be leaving, which is why he was lingering. And I don't know Mr. Kushner well, but I think he picked up on the same thing. And so I knew something was about to happen that I needed to pay very close attention to.
And I found it very interesting that in the memo that you wrote after this February 14th pull-aside, you made clear that you wrote that memo in a way that was unclassified. If you affirmatively made the decision to write a memo that was unclassified, was that because you felt at some point the facts of that meeting would have to come clean and come clear and actually be able to be cleared in a way that could be shared with the American people?
Well, I remember thinking this is a very disturbing development, really important to our work. I need to document it and preserve it in a way, and this committee gets this, but sometimes when things are classified, it tangles them up. It's hard to share it within an investigative team. You have to be very careful about how you handle it for good reason. So my thinking was, if I write it in such a way that I don't include anything that would trigger a classification, that'll make it easier for us to discuss within the FBI and the government, and to hold on to it in a way that makes it accessible to us.
Well, again, it's our hope, particularly since you're a pretty knowledgeable guy and you wrote this in a way that was unclassified, that this committee will get access to that unclassified document. I think it would be very important to our investigation. Let me just ask this in closing. How many ongoing investigations at any time does the FBI have going on?
Tens of thousands.
Tens of thousands. Did the president ever ask about any other ongoing investigation?
No.
All right, those were live visuals coming out of James Comey testifying before the Senate panel. Now, he's been asked a lot of questions, and he will be continued to be posed with some of the tough questions. We already seen what James Comey wrote about when he came out with his testimony, which went public late last night. And today he is there to answer specific questions that members of the Congress might have for him. Joining me here in the studio for more on this is Pramit Pal Chaudhary. He's the foreign editor of Hindustan Times. Pramit, a couple of tough questions already. We'll, of course, be tracking the rest of the testimony as well. But what are the highlights till now, according to you?
Well, I think the number one statement of interest by Comey has been the question has his statement that President Trump very clearly, in his view, pressured him on dropping the investigation on the Russian connections. And that automatically runs into the legal issue of whether or not that was obstruction of justice.
Right.
And that is the most important part of the testimony so far, both in what he wrote and what he has now said in the Q&A section, where he has made it very clear that he felt uncomfortable. The president kept pressing him on the issue of loyalty. And urged him to basically, in indirect ways, to drop the investigation on the Trump campaign's relationship with the Russian government. That will be the core of the investigation right now.
And also kept on asking him, whether he was happy with his job. In fact, he says that he kept on reassuring, but he got very confused later on. But, when asked specifically about did the president, does it amount to obstruction of justice, whatever events that led up to, he said that it's up to the Senate committee to decide.
Correct.
Steering clear, of course. So is that the way forward, or do you think him being clear at that point could have made a little bit of difference? Because what we saw today was, in fact, a repetition of what he'd already said in that written statement.
See, as an FBI chief, the FBI is like essentially a police force, right? It's a federal investigation agency. So he knows that the definition of whether or not a person has carried out obstruction of justice is something that has to be left to a judicial bench, not to him as an investigator. So like any policeman, when asked, do you feel this person has committed a crime, he'll just say that is up to the honorable judge to decide. All I know is that the person did X, Y, Z. So Comey is being actually very sensible. He's making it clear that he cannot be accused later of trying to prejudge that your testimony is tainted because you're biased against the president. So he's trying to maintain a factual, objective description of what exactly happened between him and the president. And he knows the more he brings in his personal interpretation of what happened, that's going to weaken the case against him.
Right.
That the Senate Republicans, or those who are pro-Trump, are going to say, you're making subjective statements here which don't have any factual statement. And the fact that you are already declaring the president guilty of a crime indicates that your testimony is tainted. Because remember, Comey has a problem. Nobody else is in the room except him and Trump.
Absolutely. In fact, I was coming to that. This case is not only interesting but remarkable, because of the fact that Comey has almost everything documented, and he started documenting everything pretty early on, perhaps looking at the nature or the personality of President Donald Trump.
Yep.
But that's the key question. Most of these conversations that he had with the president were one-on-one,
yes.
and there is no witness, to most of these conversations. So that, is going to be, I think, one of the key issues for the committee to come up with a concrete decision. It's his word against the president.
Absolutely. And so Comey has to maintain the credibility of his testimony more than anything else. That versus somebody like Donald Trump, whose credibility is relatively minimal, versus the fact that he is an FBI director, the top legal enforcement officer in the country. Will a senator or an investigator look at the two of them and say, I think he's more likely to be correct? And Comey has notes. Trump doesn't, or so far as we know he doesn't, though Trump has said he has tapes, but he's never come up with anything tangible on this issue. So it's going to be the credibility of him versus the rest. Now, the point that you keep in mind, Comey is just the beginning of the investigation, right? After this, remember, they've already said they're planning to bring in Jared Kushner. They're bringing in, and at some point, depending on where the investigation goes, you could theoretically also see the intelligence agencies who have taped conversations. Because remember, the reason why they know that Trump's team, that Michael Flynn, Trump's NSA, was talking to the Russian ambassador is because they had tapped the Russian ambassador's phone.
That's right.
Now, normally that's a classified transcript. But they could have
if need be, that could be produced.
The Senate Intelligence Committee could say, we'll have a closed-door session, and we will internally listen to this, and the NSA will testify. So Comey knows that he's really just the spearhead of a very long process. So therefore, for him, the game is to be as cool, as calm, and as credible as possible.
And to remain, stick to the facts,
yes,
basically.
Exactly.
That's key. All right, Pramit, hold on to that thought. We have to dip back to that testimony of James Comey there in front of the Senate committee. Let's go back and listen in.
You don't know of anyone that's ever been charged for hoping something. Is that a fair statement?
I don't, as I sit here.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Feinstein.
Thanks very much, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Comey, I just want you to know that I have great respect for you. Senator Cornyn and I sit on the Judiciary Committee, so we have occasion to have you before us. And I know that you're a man of strength and integrity. And I really regret the situation that we all find ourselves in. I just want to say that. Let me begin with one overarching question. Why do you believe you were fired?
I guess I don't know for sure. I believe I think the president had his word that I was fired because of the Russia investigation. Something about the way I was conducting it, the president felt created pressure on him that he wanted to relieve. Again, I didn't know that at the time, but I've watched his interview. I've read the press accounts of his conversations, so I take him at his word there. Now, look, I could be wrong. Maybe he's saying something that's not true, but I take him at his word, at least based on what I know now.
Talk for a moment about his request that you pledge loyalty and your response to that and what impact you believe that had.
I don't know for sure because I don't know the president well enough to read him well. I think it was, first of all, our relationship didn't get off to a great start given the conversation I had to have on January 6th. this was not, this didn't improve the relationship because it was very, very awkward. He was asking for something and I was refusing to give it. But again, I don't know him well enough to know how he reacted to that exactly.
Do you believe the Russia investigation played a role?
And why I was fired?
Yes.
Yes, because I've seen the president say so.
Let's go to the Flynn issue. Senator Risch outlined, I hope you could see your way to letting Flynn go. He's a good guy. I hope you can let this go. But you also said in your written remarks, and I quote, that you had understood the president to be requesting that we drop any investigation of Flynn in connection with false statements about his conversations with the Russian ambassador in December, end quote. Please go into that with more detail.
Well, the context and the president's words are what led me to that conclusion. As I said in my statement, I could be wrong, but Flynn had been forced to resign the day before. And the controversy around General Flynn at that point in time was centered on whether he had lied to the vice president about the nature of his conversations with the Russians, whether he had been candid with others in the course of that. And so that happens on the day before. On the 14th, the president makes specific reference to that. And so that's why I understood him to be saying that what he wanted me to do was drop any investigation connected to Flynn's account of his conversations with the Russians.
Now, here's the question. You're big, you're strong. I know the Oval Office, and I know what happens to people when they walk in. There is a certain amount of intimidation. But why didn't you stop and say, Mr. President, this is wrong. I cannot discuss this with you?
It's a great question. Maybe if I were stronger, I would have. I was so stunned by the conversation that I just took it in. And the only thing I could think to say, because I was playing in my mind, because I was going to remember every word he said, I was playing in my mind, what should my response be? And that's why I very carefully chose the words. And look, I've seen the tweet about tapes. Lordy, I hope there are tapes. I remember saying, I agree he's a good guy, as a way of saying I'm not agreeing with what you just asked me to do. Again, maybe other people would be stronger in that circumstance, but that's how I conducted myself. I hope I'll never have another opportunity. Maybe if I did it again, I would do it better.
You described two phone calls that you received from President Trump, one on March 30 and one on April 11, where he, quote, described the Russia investigation as a cloud that was impairing his ability, end quote, as president, and asked you, quote, to lift the cloud, end quote. How did you interpret that? And what did you believe he wanted you to do?
I interpreted that as he was frustrated that the Russia investigation was taking up so much time and energy. I think he meant of the executive branch, but in the public square in general, and it was making it difficult for him to focus on other priorities of his. But what he asked me was actually narrower than that. So I think what he meant by the cloud, and again, I could be wrong, but what I think he meant by the cloud was the entire investigation is taking up oxygen and making it hard for me to focus on the things I want to focus on. The ask was to get it out that I, the president, am not personally under investigation.
After April 11th, did he ask you more ever about the Russia investigation? Did he ask you any questions?
We never spoke again after April 11th.
You told the president, I would see what we could do. What did you mean?
That was kind of a slightly cowardly way of trying to avoid telling him we're not going to do that, that I would see what we could do. It was a way of kind of getting off the phone, frankly. And then I turned and handed it to the acting Deputy Attorney General, Mr. Bente.
So I wanted to go into that. Who did you talk with about that, lifting the cloud, stopping the investigation back at the FBI, and what was their response?
Well, the FBI, during one of the two conversations, I'm not remembering exactly, I think the first, my chief of staff was actually sitting in front of me, and heard my end of the conversation because the president's call was a surprise. And I discussed the lifting the cloud and the request with the senior leadership team, who typically, and I think in all these circumstances, was the deputy director, my chief of staff, the general counsel, the deputy director's chief counsel, and I think in a number of circumstances, the number 3 in the FBI, and a few of the conversations included the head of the National Security Branch. So that group of us that lead the FBI when it comes to national security.
Okay. All right, Pramit Pal Chaudhary is still here with me in the studio. Pramit, as you were talking about earlier, it's going to be a long, drawn process, and James Comey knows it well. So at this point, what we're hearing and what this committee has to decide is mostly based on what James Comey is saying.
Correct.
And certain things like, for instance, loyalty. So it's about interpretation. So it's going to be a very difficult job for the members to come out and say who's right and who's wrong, and it doesn't end there.
Right. No, exactly. But you can see that Comey is already mentioning people who were there in some parts of the conversation, who overheard bits of the telephone. So he mentioned the FBI leadership team. So my sense would be now the Senate panel will begin to call these people in one by one. And they will at least be able to, we assume, come in and say what Mr. Comey is saying. This fragment, that fragment is correct.
Right.
And we'll see who Trump brings in. But the point is the panel can keep bringing in one after another people. They can bring in Kushner. They've tried to bring in Michael Flynn, who immediately said, I'm not going to testify, or I will not testify, I will not say anything, and so on and so forth. So you can bring in a stream of people waiting for somebody to contradict somebody else, at which point you then have the wedge to go in and say, we need to go further on this. But the point is to keep in mind that there are 3 parallel investigations now going on about President Trump's campaign team's relationship with the Russian government.
Right.
So you have 2 Senate ones, Senate Intelligence and I believe Senate Ethics committees. Right. And then the most important is Mueller, Bob Mueller, the former FBI director, who has now been appointed special counsel.
Right.
And he is effectively the equivalent of a prosecutor. And Mueller's investigation hasn't even begun yet. I mean, he's still setting it up, if you wish. And that's going to be interesting because he will obviously be watching all of this, and then he will begin his process of subpoenaing people, calling them in. You now have to testify under oath before a prosecutor. And if you lie before a prosecutor under oath, that's a felony. That's a high crime and misdemeanor. So that is going to be the most interesting game. But it's going to be a very interesting game because it ultimately depends on the U.S. Congress to take all of these investigations and then judge as to whether or not this could go to the next and the highest step, which would be impeachment.
Right.
And that, my sense would be, knowing the way American politics in any democracy works, they will try to judge what the public mood is.
Okay.
How much. So Nixon and Clinton, when they were being under the impeachment process, they did well so long as the public opinion polls held strong with them. Then U.S. congressmen are looking at the polls and saying, it's okay, my voters will not defect over this issue.
Right.
So the real test is going to be what happens now with these 3 investigations going on all the way through this year, all the way into next year, and then in November next year, the midterm elections, when the U.S. Congress's entire lower house and 1/3 of the Senate go back.
Right.
If they go back and they find that their constituents are saying, we don't trust this president anymore, then you'll see the mood shift. And then when that comes in, they will basically give a green signal to Mueller, the special counsel, you can do your worst, because we will support you rather than the president. Right now, the Congress, which is Republican-dominated, is holding to Trump. But they're watching. They're watching every poll, and they're watching every testimony that's coming out.
And also, there are reports that some of the Republicans, in fact, do not agree with Donald Trump, and they're perhaps siding with James Comey.
I mean, Senator John McCain has been a strident, constant critic of President Trump. And I have met senior Republicans who have told me, they said, the possibility of President Pence within 3 years is not something we will rule out, even as Republicans.
But as you said, it's too early to talk about an impeachment right now. 3 different investigations that are being carried out simultaneously. Of course, this is one very important developing story that we will be tracking very, very closely through the evening today. We're going to be taking a very short break. Be right back. Lots more to talk about as far as the UK election is concerned. We'll be right back.